Doctor, how's it going?
Appreciate you, brother.
All right.
How's everybody doing? Good. Well, first order of business, I guess, for us to do is to say welcome. Of course, we heard from our Deputy Director, Krewasky Salter, and Director Q's crew, and all the folks here at the museum. It's an honor to be here again. And Colonel, it's a particular honor to sit here with you, realizing that you've been deeply involved in this museum since before it was open, and you've curated. And this is the third exhibit in
That I curated?
no, in terms of like the exhibits that have rotated through the hall.
Oh yeah, this is the third exhibition that will rotate through the temporary exhibition space.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's get right to it. First of all, this is an incredibly conceived book. If you've already bought it, great. If not, don't leave here without it if at all possible, because so much information in such a tightly packed place, but not overburdened. The language is clean, the everything in here. Let's start with that. Thank you so much. Good. See, mine ain't got no brain. Oh no, C-SPAN is good to see. But this text, We Return Fighting, how did you conceive this book? How did you put it together? How did you structure the text?
The book is born out of the exhibition. A decision was made to do the exhibition, and then once that decision was made, I started meeting with Kinshasa on a regular basis, and we were talking about the story. And Kinshasa plays poker very well. So I was talking to her, and she was taking everything in, and she would ask me questions. I would leave the office, but I would have meetings with my then boss, Rex Ellis. And then one day he said, Kinshasa likes what you're saying. I don't know what you're saying when you meet with Kinshasa, but she likes what you're saying. And then I realized that, okay, she might play poker, but now I know she's listening. And so the next time I met with Kinshasa, she said, not only should we do an exhibition, I think we can do a book. And so the book was actually born when I would have my one-on-one meetings sitting down with Kinshasa. And from that point on, not only were we executing an exhibition, we started developing the construct for a book.
And in a moment we'll talk about why World War I, why that moment. But before we get there, one of the way that this book is conceived, one of the brilliant things about it is that you're taking some figures that we know, some events that we kind of are aware of, but you're reading them very differently. How did you curate authors and then, parse out the work and then go through the editorial process to get this kind of distinct way of not only talking about African American history, but really talking about world history through the lens of World War II?
Exactly. So what we did, we already had scholarly advisors for the exhibition. And so when we decided who were going to be the individuals to write for the book, it was very easy. We selected all of the scholarly advisors who were working on the exhibition. And what the scholarly advisors are, those are the people that bring the curators down to earth. I mean, you pick big brain people, and you send your script to them, and they help you make sure you get your interpretations right. So we selected all of the scholars for the exhibition. But one thing we had did with the exhibition was to make sure that we did not want to drop our readers nor our visitors into the Black experience in World War I without them understanding what World War I really was. So we have a part called The Global War. And so the first chapter was written by Jay Winters, Professor Emeritus of Yale University, who now lives in France. And so his chapter is the first chapter. And so it helps us understand why World War I. So he goes in detail in a very few pages on how World War I became a global war in a page and a half. And then he talks about stalemate, 1960 and on into the war, and that is the first chapter that sets the stage. It was my mission in chapter 2 to do two distinct things, and that was to have readers understand, and we do this in the exhibition, that African Americans did not just step on the battlefield in World War I, they had been there from the beginning of the nation. And so my mission was to make sure that we understood that, but also to make sure people understood what a dark world in America was for Black Americans. So when you read chapter 2, you see the turning back of time after the ending of slavery, the rise of Jim Crowism, extreme segregation, the 1883 Civil Rights Act, which turns back the clock. 13 years later, Plessy versus Ferguson. All along, you have people who are being lynched and killed. We have a quote in there from Robert Smalls, a World War II veteran, who says in 1895 that he estimates by that time over 53,000 African Americans had been killed. And we talk about mob violence. And so we talk about those while at the same time African Americans are serving in the military. So that was my mission in chapter 2, and also to talk about the service of African Americans in World War I. Chapter 3 was written by another one of our scholars, Dr. John Morrow, who is the John Hope Franklin Professor of History and Chair at the University of Georgia. And it was his mission to create a tight shot group. I'm a soldier, so some of you know shot group is you want to hit that target. A tight shot group between 1913 and 1919. So he went a little further in detail in the service of African Americans. But what he also brought to the table is he is an imperialist researcher and writer. This was the time during imperialism. So he talks about when the Europeans went to war, the rest of the world went to war because they had all these colonies. And so he goes into detail. That's key. We'll talk about that a little later on. And then he also talks about the further mob violence that's going on. He talks about East St. Louis and Houston in 1917. And the key to those two riots is we had already entered the war, and we are still having these types of incidences going on. And so that was Jay Morrow's piece. And then we had 10 profiles, and so 3 of our other scholars, Chad Williams, Lisa Boudreau, and Curtis Young, they write profiles. And then we picked up another scholar, Brittany Cooper, who wrote, is she really? Okay, I mean, powerful. And she writes the piece on Churl and Ida B. Wells. And so that is the construct. When you read the book, we also have a beautiful timeline. Bill Pretzer and one of our research assistants, Alicia Norwood, you pull that out, it goes from 1863 to 1963, and it weaves into social, cultural, economic, and military service all in that timeline. We have more than 140 captions, some of the artifacts and the images, and our exhibition research assistant, Patrice O'Gan, she wrote half of those and I wrote the other half, and so that is how the book is laid out.
Wow. I want to ask about the distinction, like what's in the exhibition that may not be in the book and vice versa. Before we get there, the exhibit opens next month.
13 December.
Wow, you know, it's interesting because
our project manager, he's here too. Always be somebody.
Okay, I think we'll make sure that we're all on tab. It's interesting, thinking about one of your heroes, of course, who, you know, and by the way, we're going to talk for a little while and we open it up so folks begin to think about things you want to ask and maybe comment on. But one of your heroes that I'm sure you're going to talk about a little bit more a little later is Colonel Charles Young.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it was, according to Judge Wilkins, Robert Wilkins in his book, Long Road to Hard Truth, it was 100 years ago this December that Young gives a talk because the veterans have come back and said they want a Negro Memorial. I mean, you know, Civil War veterans come back, George Washington Williams and them, we want a museum or we want a memorial. Maybe it's supposed to be near Howard. That would have been great. They can't obviously afford to buy the property now there, but then we have this, we're good. So then the World War I veterans come back and say, we want a Negro Memorial. Maybe it should be bigger than that. But Charles Young gives a talk where he says, you know, it'd be nice to have a building and nice to have brass and monuments, but perhaps the real monument would be to give these soldiers the thing they went abroad to fight for. The rights, stop lynching people, all this stuff. So I say that because I'm thinking about the theme that you really put this together, not only in your essay, but as the spine of this book. It kind of echoes what you did in the first major publication for the museum when you talk about this double victory, but then you take it backward in time. We think about double V in World War II, but you conceptualize it. Thinking about World War I and how people of African descent entered that war, not just from the United States, but from around the world, this concept of double victory. And you know, like I say, as a career military man, has risen to the highest ranks as a scholar, and you know, now as a man who is helping us interpret the experiences of not only our people but Americans generally. How delicate in this World War I narrative is this balance between what black people are trying to do? You point out in your essay in the earlier book, and then gesture toward it in this one. There are probably more black people fought for the British than fought for the Americans.
The American Revolution. Well, so double victory, why was World War I important? So double victory, the essence of double victory is when African Americans fought for this nation, their nation throughout history, they were not only fighting to help their nation win, they were fighting to achieve democracy and equality for themselves and their families. And so that is what double victory really means. And so when you go back to the American Revolution, an estimated number of 6,000 African Americans fight for the U.S. forces, but an estimated 20,000 fight for the British. And when you take that theme forward up to the beginning of the American Civil War, African Americans were always fighting for that side which offered them the best chance at freedom. And so that's what double victory is. And so we bring that forward to World War I, setting the stage that African Americans had always been there. The reason why World War I to me was so important and is a bridge is because African Americans fought when President Wilson said, we must fight to make the world safe for democracy. And they thought that meant them. And so when they went to fight, the double victory they were fighting for was not just to help America win the war when they went overseas. They were fighting that hopefully when they got back, that the equalities of being a citizen, democracy, mob violence, economic stability, educational uplift, and a host of other things would come to them. But within 24 months after the declaration of war was given on 6 April 1917, this thing called the Red Summer erupted. And that is kind of what Charles Young was talking about. These soldiers of African descent did not go to Europe just to fight to help America win. They fought to help their citizens win in America. And that didn't happen. And that's why this term called the New Negro came about.
Yes.
And the New Negro, the phrase came about 25 years earlier, but it was an intellectual and economic New Negro. Most of us know the New Negro from 1919. That New Negro was an aggressive New Negro. He was the one that was emboldened after fighting on the battlefield, and his family members and friends were also emboldened to make sure that what we went to fight for to make the world safe for democracy was also going to make America safe for democracy. That's why we have the quote with A. Philip Randolph.
Listen, man.
Georgia was a metaphor for America. He said, I would rather make Georgia safe for democracy. When the president said, make the world safe for democracy, A. Philip Randolph said, I would rather make Georgia safe for the Negro. And Georgia was a metaphor for America.
We were talking about that backstage. A. Philip Randolph said that, J. Edgar Hoover, fresh out of law school in this town, and just taking over military intelligence division, right? He said A. Philip Randolph is the most dangerous Negro in America. He's an open socialist, not even 10 years after the Bolshevik Revolution. So you got me. So but that's interesting because he's in part, and then we read this in terms of the title we picked, and also what's in the exhibit that's not in here and vice versa, so we can get the housekeeping that way, because I'm going to come right back to that. No, but I do want to ask you though, relative to We Return Fighting, that's what from Du Bois.
Yes.
But Randolph, which I think they do brilliantly in this book, Randolph is distinguishing himself from Du Bois.
Yes.
And even as you narrate here, these conservative blacks, like there's a lot of us and a lot of higher students out here tonight, so they came to see you, brother. So Elaine Locke is credited with the new Negro. Yeah, we were talking about that. He was us all.
I was professor of military science.
Yes, indeed. Yes, Howard is like Atlanta. So everybody knows somebody that went to Howard or worked at Howard. Everybody got somebody in Atlanta. So yeah, absolutely. No, but Randolph is very critical of not only Du Bois, but Elaine Locke, some of these conservative folks, and Du Bois himself. This is not the first editorial he writes relative to the war.
Right.
Why do you pick We Return Fighting and make the deliberate choice not to say World War I and the shaping of black participation in the war, I mean, this broader concept? I mean, Du Bois is balancing something.
Yeah, I think there might be four. Maybe get the okay. So the first one, you're exactly right. So A. Philip Randolph and W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois was in his mid-40s in 1917. A. Philip Randolph was 28 years old, and Du Bois was lumped in what he called the old crowd Negro. So these youngsters, if you will, in that time, were labeling those individuals the old crowd Negroes, those who would say, close ranks and go fight, which is what Du Bois said in his close ranks article in 1918, but the sentiment had already been there from 15, 16, and 17, because as you know, he was writing about the war when it started in 1914.
You mentioned the imperialism chapter, that's very important. In 1915 article, what is it, in Atlantic Monthly?
Yes. Du Bois did a trip to France starting in December of 1918 for 3 months after the war. And he was disturbed with what he found, because he was an intellectual that mainly convinced African Americans to close ranks and go to war. And he did a research, and he found out about all the discrimination and some African Americans who had lost their lives on the battlefield, and some who lost their lives not on the battlefield. And so he came back, and in May of 1919, that's when he wrote a juxtaposition of closed ranks. And he said, we'll be fools and cowards if we go and fight for our nation, and then we come back to the same nation, I'm paraphrasing, that we left. And so the reason we termed this We Return Fighting, because the centennial of World War I is really over. This year is the centennial of the new Negro. And so that's why the exhibition is entitled We Return Fighting. And I think one of the questions you may have been asking me is, one word you don't see in the exhibition title nor in the book, you don't see military.
Yes, yes.
It's not entitled, the exhibition is not entitled The African American Military Experience in World War I, and the book is not entitled World War I and the Military Shaping and Black Identity. You don't see military in there for a reason. This exhibition, just like Double Victory, is not about the service necessarily of African Americans on the battlefield. It's why they served. And the reason they served is because they were citizens of this country. And they wanted to make sure that they reaped all the benefits. So the exhibition is not late, it's on time. We always intended for it to open in 1919 because this is the centennial of the new Negro.
Indeed. Let's do just one more housekeeping piece. When folks go through the exhibit, they're going to see some remarkable things. We were talking backstage about Charles Young Seward, and just so many other things. But in this book, when you pick up this book, when you start reading this book, what's in here that's not in the exhibit and vice versa?
Awful lot in both. Okay, so number one, what's in the exhibition that's not in the book are the live artifacts that you can really see up close. So the book allows us to give more detail and put meat on the bones why there was a World War I, why the entire world went to war in a matter of 6 weeks. The book also allows us to give more detail on what is the differences between the 92nd and the 93rd Division, and why the 93rd Division and the 369th, and not only the 369th, the 370th, the 371st, and the 372nd was so important. So you have that in the book. In the exhibition, we also have just a few additional vignettes. But one thing I like to say is the big difference between the exhibition and the book is they both have a shelf life. But the exhibition shelf life will end on 14 June. This book, if you buy it, it has a shelf life that will be on your library forever. And so that's the big difference between the book and the exhibition. The exhibition will leave and we will mount another very important exhibition. I won't say what it is because I don't know if it's for public consumption, but the book will be there forever.
Yes, sir. Okay, now we're going to shift and maybe talk about, and believe me, every page in this book, every paragraph could open up into a whole.
Oh, yes.
For me, as somebody who's an inveterate reader, I'm reading this like, wow. So there's any number of places we can go. Certainly we want to talk about the role of women, and there's so many different ones. We can start with some of these heroic figures. But thinking about 1915, we know Booker T. Washington died in 1915. Birth of a Nation comes out in 1915. You got Woodrow Wilson curated and narrated in here. Let's pick a figure maybe that helps us work around to some of the other conversations. We're in D.C. Charles Hamilton Houston.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Let's talk about Charlie Houston.
Yeah,
He's known for training the people who killed Jim Crow as a lawyer, but this dude was one of the highest ranking black officers in World War I.
Well, yeah, he was a lieutenant, so that's not, I see some soldiers and sailors, that's not very high for an African-American in that time.
That's what I mean, yeah.
He was a lieutenant. But I ask people all the time, do you know who Charles Hamilton Houston is and, what is he important for? And everyone who knows him as a lawyer. But few people know that he was one of those individuals who went to Fort Des Moines, earned an officership, and served as a lieutenant overseas and fought in France in the 368th Infantry Division of the Infantry Regiment of the 92nd Division. And it was that experience that he had in the military when he saw the way he was treated and other African Americans were treated, that he decided that what his father always wanted him to be, which was his father was wanted him to be a lawyer. He was a lawyer himself. They worked together. Yes.
You have a picture of Charles Hamilton.
I'll talk about that in a second.
What did you
Charles Hamilton Houston? That's where he got his foundation to be a lawyer. His experience. So let's talk about. So when you open the book, I collected those two. The reason we have that picture is it was a story. We knew where his typewriter was. His typewriter is in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We wanted artifacts. And we wanted artifacts that resonated all kinds of things, but we wanted something that resonated perhaps military. Nobody had it. They had the address of his son. My wife is in the audience. I have to be careful, but she knows the story.
Charles Hamilton Houston's son.
Charles Hamilton Houston just passed away last year.
Baltimore.
He gave me that picture and that pistol, so I'll tell the story.
Wow.
So I think Rex knows about this. I got in my car and I drove up to Baltimore to the address. I had my Smithsonian badge in my hand. I knocked on the door. I got up the stairs and I stepped back and I was going like this. His wife came to the door and said, to make a long story short, I announced who I was. I'm Krewasky Salter. I work for the Smithsonian. Are you Charles Hamilton Houston's son and daughter-in-law? Make a long story short, I visited with them twice. And you talk to people and you make a connection. They had nothing to give. We don't know. The second visit, after they called me, they said, you know what? Charles has been keeping his father's revolver from World War I. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. Make a long story short, go back up there, I collected the pistol. They pulled out that image. I had never seen that image before. And the reason we know who all those individuals are, they had it meticulously written on the back. That's his father. He was in the Oddfellows.
And Oddfellows business still?
Yeah.
Right.
And so they gave us 4 objects. And there are stories like that for just about all of the objects that are in the exhibition that we own. People donated those to us. And they did not want to give that up because they did not want his father to be seen as a militant with a weapon. That's what they told me. But they said because of this museum, and that's one thing that this museum is doing, it is convincing people to give up artifacts that they've had for years tucked away somewhere. So I remember getting that.
It's a lot of trust.
Yeah, and I wrapped it up, put it in my car, drove out to, I live in Baltimore, drove out of Baltimore, got it to It's going to be in the exhibition, and it now belongs to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Let's continue. His granddaughter, I think is a student. Charles Hamilton Houston's granddaughter or great-granddaughter is a student at Howard Law School.
That's right. No question. Keep it tight.
Making a connection with the family, and just talking to them, and you still talk to these individuals.
Yeah. So let's continue that vein then. So Houston, who's clearly got a vision, and like you said, what he saw in war kind of empowered him to keep going and trouble his spirit.
Right.
There are differences between black people who participate in this war, right? I remember reading about these cats that came from, my homies from Nashville got beef from these young guys from Philadelphia. Yeah. We're not taking this stuff.
Yeah. Right, so it's in the exhibition, but yeah,
it's in there. But zeroing in on the differences between black folks. Could you talk a little bit about the 369? Because you wrote another insight in here about 369. Right. And what happened in South Carolina? You got cats like Noble Sissel and somebody, and these southern white dudes really want to hold racial order. But these are not Negroes that are used to just
African Americans have never been monolithic, and they are not the same depending on what region of the country you were from. And so when the 369th, who were New York City boys, but not all of them were New York City boys. I mean, the 369th recruited from all over the North, and there were a few individuals from the South. But where were they sent to train? In South Carolina. And so there was a clash. The white Southern status quo in South Carolina, and then you have these Northern African Americans coming down to train. They were supposed to be there for 3, 4, 5 months. They only stayed 4.5 weeks. They had to get them out.
No question.
Because there was going to be a clash.
Right here.
That's right. This is September, October. Well, the reason is this is September, October of 19, and I think, well, John writes about this book, and it's about this in the book. It's in the exhibition. September, October of 1917 is only 3 months after Brownsville and after East St. Louis. So one of the things we always do is you have to put it in the context.
Absolutely.
And so they did not want another Brownsville where the 24th did actually shoot up the town. Unlike the 25th.
What happened in Brownsville?
Yes, Brownsville, there was one in 1906 with the 25th. I get them mixed up sometimes. Where the accusations were not true, and President Roosevelt discharged 167 soldiers for something that was unfounded, and it has never been proved. However, in Houston, when a white police officer began to beat a black woman when he was looking for a soldier, those brothers did go out and shoot up the town. And to make a long story short, after 3 court-martials, 19 of them were sent to the gallows. And we will talk about them in the exhibition.
And I know we can't cover everything, but just so the folks know.
And so that's why they left South Carolina, and that's one of the reasons they were the first African-American unit in France, because instead of sending them to retrain, they sent them to the debarkation point, and they arrived in France on New Year's Day. Because the rest of the 93rd Division, they were never together, did not arrive until April. That's one of the main reasons why the 369th was the first unit.
Well, I'm going to ask about women in this larger concept, but before we do, let's now the brothers are in, and it's not just brothers, because of course the YMCA involved.
And we'll talk about that. We have an entire section, and women are weaved throughout, just like in the military.
Let's do that, and then maybe we'll end with the global scope. So talk about the women. There was a chapter you did in here on Gold Star mothers.
Yes, I've never seen anywhere. She is one of our scholars, and she is the senior military curator at the Tennessee State Museum of History. And so she writes about the Gold Star mothers. So Gold Star mothers were African American. They were mothers who lost a son during World War I. And so white and black. And they had these pilgrimages that went to France, 3 of them in 30, 31, and 32, or 31 to 33. Make a long story short, they were also segregated. And so there was, discussion. Our sons and husbands fought in a segregated military, and we are going to visit their grave sites 12 years later and segregated pilgrimages. So Lisa Boudreau writes that, but also Brittany Cooper writes about Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell.
Yeah.
She talks about the juxtaposition of those individuals. And this goes to the fact that African Americans have never been monolithic, just like W.E.B. Du Bois, and I know we're wrapping it up, and we have A. Philip Randolph. Their means were the same: better lives for African American, just like Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell. But they had different ways of doing it. Ida B. Wells, I mean, she was a fire breather. I mean, she would punch you in the nose. And
Literally.
Mary,
Yes, sir.
that's why I said that.
Yes, sir.
And Mary was a dignified agitator. She says that in her book. And she just kind of believed in, doing things in a dignified manner. But their instinct was the same. And that's throughout. That's why we chose people for who they are. And not only African Americans. I mean, we talk about, we always say African Americans and their white supporters. So you will see stories about white Americans in this exhibition, just like you see throughout the museum, who were friends of the forward progress of African Americans.
So we're going to open it up if folks want to start moving toward the microphones. I mean, like I said, we just scratched the surface. I mean, everybody is in here from Josephine Baker to Sidney Bechet and Louis Armstrong.
Yes.
I mean, it really is a remarkable moment. And as folks are moving toward the microphone to make comments or questions, they're going to ask this final question. Because what we didn't touch on yet is the global scope of how African people around the world came to know each other in this moment. When those brothers get off their troop transport, when these women are going to do support, they need black people from other places.
Oh yeah, I'll keep this real quick so we can open it up. But yes, a part of this being a global war is African Americans, although they entered the war with white Americans in 1917 and made it to France in 1918, when the world went to war, because this was a period of imperialism, France had at least 17 colonies that went to war when they went to war. The British had colonies in the East Indies and the Caribbean and all over the world. When they went to war, guess who else went to war? Their colonial soldiers went to war. And Germany had 4 colonies. When they went to war, those 4 Germanies went to war. Those 4 German colonies. So that's why you have people of African descent fighting in World War I beginning in 1914. And they do meet each other.
This was an exhibit, right? We can see this in real life.
Yeah, this is one of our artifacts we're getting from France.
All the Africans from different places in the African world, the Caribbean, Africa.
Exhibition.
So I want to speak a word. This Negro got a fade just like me. I didn't even know that. So you can't go back to Columbus, Georgia the same way after you've seen your brothers. There's no question about it. I think it's that way back there. How you doing, brother? Please.
John, we didn't get
How you doing, John? Excuse me.
Excuse me, Jim. Before you go totally rogue,
Yes.
we're going to do one thing. We're going to thank them, these gentlemen, and we're going to go to the Q&A. Ladies and gentlemen.